February 27th, 1939. Moscow. Lenin's widow is dying. Nadezhda Krupskaya, 70 years old. The day after her birthday. Official cause: acute appendicitis. But 3 different stories would emerge about what really happened that day. Stalin's secretary, Alexander Poskrebyshev, later claimed that Stalin ordered her poisoning during her birthday celebration. Lazar Kaganovich, a former Politburo member, suggested that Lavrenti Beria may have been involved. I can't dismiss that possibility. He might have. Leon Trotsky called her one of the most tragic figures in revolutionary history. What really happened to Lenin's wife after he died? She was born in 1869 in St. Petersburg to an impoverished noble family. Her father, Konstantin Krupsky, was a military officer who lost his commission after being suspected of revolutionary activities and was forced to work in factories. He died when Nadezhda was 14. Her mother, Yelizaveta, had been educated at the Bestushev courses, the highest education available to women in Russia at that time, and worked as a governess to support the family. Nadezhda attended evening school for adult workers and studied Marx in underground libraries where banned books were secretly kept. She joined a Marxist circle at 21. In 1894, she attended a Marxist discussion group where a young man was giving speeches, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, later known as Lenin. She was impressed by his speeches, not his personality. 2 years later, both were arrested for revolutionary activities. Lenin was sentenced to 3 years' exile in Shushenskoye, Siberia, and Krupskaya received the same sentence but was told she could join him in exile only if they married. They married in Siberia in 1898. Leon Trotsky, who worked closely with them years later, wrote about her role. She was at the center of all the Bolshevik organization work, coordinating agents, managing secret communications, and coding messages. In her room, there was always a smell of burned paper from the secret letters she heated over the fire to read. She wasn't just Lenin's wife. She ran the Bolshevik underground network across the Russian Empire, coordinating agents, coding messages, managing secret addresses, and maintaining communications that kept the revolutionary movement alive. The revolution succeeded, in large part, because of her. In 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power, and Krupskaya was appointed Deputy People's Commissar of Education under Anatoly Lunacharsky. She built the Soviet education system from scratch, establishing schools, libraries, and adult literacy programs that brought universal education to millions. She became chairwoman of the Soviet Union's Education Committee. But then, in 1922, Lenin suffered his first stroke, which paralyzed his right side and temporarily caused him to lose his ability to speak. He recovered and returned to Moscow. That December, he had a second stroke, much worse than the first. The Central Committee ordered Lenin's complete isolation, no visitors except doctors and immediate family, though he was permitted to see his secretaries for brief periods. Stalin was made personally responsible for enforcing these rules. Days later, Lenin, with his doctor's permission, dictated a letter to Trotsky about foreign trade policy, and Krupskaya took down the dictation. The next day, Stalin called Krupskaya and shouted at her, using what she later described as the coarsest abuse for having taken the dictation. and threatened to bring her before the Control Commission for violating Lenin's medical isolation. She wrote to Lev Kamenev, "I beg of you to protect me from rude interference with my private life and from vile invectives and threats. Stalin subjected me to a storm of the coarsest abuse yesterday about a brief note that Lenin dictated to me." This was, she wrote, the worst abuse she had suffered from a fellow revolutionary in 30 years. Over the next 2 weeks, Lenin dictated his final political document, which would later become known as Lenin's Testament. It assessed the party's main leaders and warned of a dangerous split developing between Trotsky and Stalin. About Stalin, Lenin dictated, "Stalin is too rude, and this defect, although quite tolerable in our midst and in dealings among us communists, becomes intolerable in a general secretary. Therefore, I suggest that the comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from that post." Only 3 people knew about the testament: Lenin's stenographer, his sister Maria Ulyanova, and Krupskaya. Lenin wanted it read at the next party congress. But in March 1923, Lenin suffered his 3rd stroke, which left him paralyzed, unable to speak, and unable to write. Krupskaya told Lenin about Stalin's phone call, the shouting, and the abuse. Lenin dictated one final letter to Stalin, demanding an apology for his rude treatment of Krupskaya on the telephone. "I have no intention to forget so easily that which is being done against me. I ask you, therefore, whether you prefer the severance of relations between us." Stalin never apologized. On January 21st, 1924, Lenin died. Krupskaya immediately objected to embalming his body and putting it on display, calling it quasi-religious. Stalin ignored her. 4 months after Lenin's death, Krupskaya sent Lenin's testament to Lev Kamenev, who passed it to Stalin as general secretary the next day. Days later, when the 13th Party Congress began, the steering committee met and voted 30-10 not to publish the testament, but rather to read it, only to closed sessions of individual delegations. All delegates were sworn to secrecy. Inside the Soviet Union, the testament disappeared and became a forbidden subject that no one dared mention. Krupskaya watched Stalin consolidate power. She knew what Lenin wanted: remove Stalin from power. She knew Stalin's real role in the revolution had been minor. She knew the real history because she had lived it. A year later, Krupskaya joined the opposition against Stalin, allying herself first with Zinoviev and Kamenev, and later with Trotsky. 2 years after Lenin's death, Lenin's testament appeared in the New York Times after Krupskaya had smuggled a copy out of the Soviet Union. Inside Russia, nothing changed. The press was controlled, and no one read it. Trotsky's son, Leon Sadov, later quoted Krupskaya as saying, "If Lenin were alive today, he would be in jail." Krupskaya led a public attack on Stalin, and months later, Stalin's response came. Former NKVD officer Alexander Orlov later revealed what Stalin told her. "If you don't stop supporting the opposition, I'll make someone else Lenin's widow." The party could announce that the actual wife of Lenin was not her, but another Bolshevik like Elena Stasova or Rosalia Zemlyachka. You know, the party can do that. Stalin was threatening to erase her identity, to rewrite history, to make her disappear while she was still alive. Krupskaya was surrounded by GPU officers who watched her constantly. and her friends began disappearing one by one. She published a statement in Pravda announcing she was leaving the opposition, with no word of repentance and no explanation. But months later, she was back supporting the opposition. At the party congress, Stalin announced that she had abandoned the opposition. Years later, Krupskaya opposed Stalin again when she gave a speech to the Bauman District Party in Moscow defending Nikolai Bukharin and Alexei Rykov, who were leaders of the right-wing opposition. Nikita Khrushchev, who was a party official at the time, later remembered, "Without any publicity, the word went out to party circles to give her a working over. It was a bitter thing to watch her at these sessions when everyone started coming out against her. I remember her as a broken old woman." Stalin had turned the entire party apparatus against her, meeting after meeting, everyone attacking her, publicly humiliating her. She was Lenin's widow, which made her morally untouchable. So Stalin destroyed her another way: psychological torture. In 1936, the Great Purge began, and hundreds of thousands were arrested, tortured, and executed. Krupskaya's friends, the old Bolsheviks she had worked with since the 1890s, disappeared one by one. At a plenum of the Central Committee, the fate of Nikolai Bukharin and Alexei Rykov was decided, and Krupskaya voted in favor of expelling both from the Communist Party. They would be arrested, tortured, and executed the following year. Months later, at another Central Committee meeting, Osip Pyatnitsky was to be arrested. Pyatnitsky was an old Bolshevik who had known Lenin and Krupskaya since the 1900s, had worked with them in exile, and was a leading figure in the Comintern. At the meeting, Pyatnitsky objected to the massacres and expressed doubt that the charges against party comrades were valid. Krupskaya protested his arrest. In vain. Pyatnitsky was arrested by the NKVD, stripped of party membership, and remained in jail for a year before being executed. Krupskaya continued to write articles and submit them to party publications. But every article was censored, every word scrutinized, and endless negotiations with censors were required before anything could be published. They forced her to insert praise of Stalin and to rehabilitate the GPU, with many insertions made without her knowledge and against her will. Trotsky, writing after her death, described her situation. Stalin feared Krupskaya just as he feared Gorky. Krupskaya was surrounded by an iron ring of the GPU. Her old friends disappeared one by one. Those who delayed in dying were murdered either openly or secretly. Every step she took was supervised. She held official positions: Deputy Commissar of Education, member of the Central Committee, and member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. But she had no power. Khrushchev remembered her as a broken old woman. On February 26, 1939, Krupskaya celebrated her 70th birthday, and Stalin sent her a birthday cake as he had done on previous occasions. The next morning, February 27, 1939, Krupskaya suffered acute abdominal pain with an official diagnosis of acute appendicitis with peritonitis. She died that day. 3 theories emerged from Stalin's inner circle about what had really happened. Theory 1. Stalin's secretary, Alexander Poskrebyshev, claimed Stalin ordered her poisoning during her birthday celebration. Theory 2. Lazar Kaganovich suggested Lavrenti Beria may have poisoned her, saying, "I can't dismiss that possibility. He might have. Theory 3. Stephen Thomas Passani suggested poisoned coffee instead of cake. A fourth theory was proposed by Arkady Vaxberg, who argued that medical attention was deliberately delayed for several hours, and noted that her symptoms resembled those of Pavel Aliluyev, another purported victim of poisoning. Some disputed the poisoning theories, with Luigi Zoja noting that Stalin had sent birthday cakes before and that other guests who ate the cake were unaffected. The truth remains unknown. Her ashes were buried in the Kremlin Wall necropolis, and Stalin carried her ashes during the funeral ceremony. Leon Trotsky, writing just days after her death, said that even political minds far more independent than hers had vacillated and perished under Stalin. She was personally courageous, but lacked the mental courage to break openly with the bureaucracy. With profound sorrow, we bid farewell to the loyal companion of Lenin, to an irreproachable revolutionist and one of the most tragic figures in revolutionary history. For 15 years after Lenin's death, Nadezhda Krupskaya lived under Stalin's rule. She had Lenin's final wishes: remove Stalin from power. She tried to execute them by leaking the testament to the New York Times. Stalin threatened to make someone else Lenin's widow. She watched her friends arrested, tortured, and executed, and was forced to vote for their expulsion from the party. She protested when she could, but failed to save them. Her articles were censored, her words twisted, and praise of Stalin was inserted without her permission. She became, in Khrushchev's words, a broken old woman. February 27th, 1939. Day after her 70th birthday. Dead of appendicitis, or poison, or delayed medical care. Stalin carried her ashes at the funeral. The woman who ran Lenin's underground network, who built the Soviet education system, who knew the real history, gone.